Before we go to our page today of 35 in Tractate Eiruvin, it is important to overview the three components of our discussion today. The first part of our discussion, it's called Binyan Ustira Bekelim, which is the act prohibited because of the prohibition against building or demolishing on Shabbat. The second part is the whole idea of a 40 se'ah, that utensils, and what we said earlier, that it's not considering a vessel, and we talk about mikveh, that's a separate issue. And the third one is when we discuss tchumim, and we discuss a measurement of 2,000 cubit, we need to develop in a clear way what does that mean, kanash vita, that the person is permanent in that place. In general, he needs to reach this statement, kanash vita, in some type of food that he can go ahead and eat it right away, and he is in achievable state. Let me share with you Shulchan Aruch, the code, chapter 314, just some word of introduction, which I feel it will be helpful for us to understand. The prohibition, I'm just reading the translation, the prohibition against building and demolishing on Shabbat are not relevant with respect to utensil. However, this is only true of an action that is not actual building, Mishnah Brura. But if one does an action that involves complete building or demolishing, these prohibitions are relevant in the case of utensil also. And today we're going to discuss utensil. Consequently, one may only break a cask that was one broken and whose fragments were stuck together with pitch, because breaking such a cask does not involve complete demolishing. But if a cask is entirely a whole, it is considered complete demolishing if one breaks it, and it is therefore forbidden to break it on Shabbat, even though it is small utensil that does not hold 40 se'ah. And here the Mishnah Brura bring a Rishonim that involved with all the details, which again we'll talk later. And just another point in the Mechaber, in the code itself. For example, if a cask, which means that's what the Magen Avraham said, that does not hold 40 se'ah broke, and its fragments were stuck together with pitch, one may break it in order to take out its contents, provided that he does not have in mind to perforate it with a good hole that can serve as an opening for the cask. If one does have this in mind, his action is regarded as a metaken mana, which means forming or improving a utensil, and is forbidden. And he concluded, however, if the cask is a whole and was never broken, and it is even forbidden to break it in a way that does not involve transgressing the prohibition against forming a utensil. So here again the Mishnah Brura, and he said, when it's come to 40 se'ah, for if it holds 40 se'ah is regarded as a tent and does not have the ruling of utensil. Therefore, the prohibition against building or demolishing is relevant in its case, even the building or demolishing that one does to it is only slight. And 40 se'ah means that its capacity is equivalent in volume to a space that is a cubit long by a cubit wide and a 3 cubit high. One takes into account the thickness of the cask wall, but not the thickness of its edging, which is sort of a vertical rim surrounding the edge, or of its feet. And he quotes the Rambam. Now, with that in mind, let's go to our Gemara, page 35a. We are in 35, and again, according to Rav and Shmuel, our Mishnah speaks about someone who prepare an Eruv for Yom Tov. You remember the discussion, if it's from Shabbat, from Yom Tov to Shabbat, or Shabbat to Yom Tov. So here is to Yom Tov, and he put his Eruv in the large cupboard, or in our case it's Migdal Shel Levanim. And how they translated to English in Migdal Shel Levanim? They said at a cupboard made out of
wood.
No, wooden. That's what we respond. But I think it's a regular Migdal Shel Levanim. It's a cupboard of bricks. Is that correct? It's bricks.
Yep.
Okay. It reminds me, if you read the history of civilizations, they talk about Mesopotamia and about all these ancient Sumeria. So they said that that's the way they used to put the bricks. They used to make it, they make the cupboard made out of brick and they put it together. It's like the old Iraq. Anyway, Rabbah. So the big question is, can we demolish it or not? Rabbah and Rav Yosef, the Amrei Travayu, both of them said, Hacha, in our Mishnah, b'migdal shel etz askinan. We're not talking about brick cupboard, we talk about wooden cupboard. So, this wooden contain 40 se'ah, and as we mentioned in the Kelim, chapter 15, we said that it's have the amah by amah, and the height is 3 handbreadth. So therefore this cupboard hold 40 se'ah. And we said the Mar Savar, the first Tana, which is, we have the machloket between Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer, remember? So the Tanakama says hold that this cupboard that hold 40 se'ah klihu, and Tosfot Rabbeinu Peret said that as long as it's not attached to the ground. You remember I showed you the picture that when the cupboard is attached to other spot. You remember that? I think it was 2 days ago, 2 or 3 days ago. So in that case, here is the Me'orot, picture number 174. So you see, in the situation like that, or even 172, you see that it was attached to the wall. Mm-hmm. The cupboard attached to the wall. Mm-hmm. Here we are speaking about, Tosfot Rabbeinu Peret said, something that is not attached to the ground. Ve'en binyan bekelim. There is no prohibition of building when it's come to utensil, both in Shabbat and for sure on festival. Ve'en stira bekelim, and it's also the other way. Demolishing does not apply to utensil. That's one opinion, and therefore you can go ahead and demolish this cupboard on Shabbat or Yom Tov and pull out the Eruv, which means there is no muktzeh, there is no prohibition of setting aside when it's come to demolishing the cupboard. because this cupboard is considered a utensil and it's not considering as a building, and you allow to go and carry it. Umar Savar, however, Rabbi Eliezer holds, Ohel Hu, he said that this is a tent, which means a wooden implement of such large size is no longer classified as a utensil, and therefore it's considered as a building, and subject to the prohibition against building and dismantling on Shabbat. So here the Mishnah speaks even for someone who make this Eruv for Shabbat, because according to the Tana Kama, who hold that the one can demolish it, because he hold that in the utensil is no such a thing of demolishing, even on Shabbat you're allowed to go ahead and pull out the Eruv. However, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that he hold that this is a building and therefore you cannot demolish it, so therefore even on Yom Tov it's not considering Eruv. So however, according to Rav and Shmuel, that they tells us that the Mishnah hold, we speak here about a brick cupboard, that it's detached, Eruv apply only on Yom Tov. Next, Ubiplugta dehane tanai. So this apply to another, and you remember we did it many times. Part of Talmudic study is juxtaposition, which means for us to understand this sugya, this subject, we need for a moment to digress, to bring another subject, and then to make some comparison between the two. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's not. Ditnan, we learn in a tractate Zavim, chapter 4, Mishnah 3. Hekish al gabei shida teva umigdal. So here it's important to know that when it's come to a person who have a discharge, it's called zav. The same apply to women who deliver a child, right? And the same apply to female discharge. All this, we said that there is a 3 category of ritual impurity. Any of us remember what we discussed in the past, the 3 categories? 1, it's called maga. Maga meaning if that person touched another person, or he touched utensil, or he touched food, that's called tum'at maga, ritual impurity by touching something. The second category, it's called masa, mem sin aleph, which means carrying. If a pure person, in a sense, someone who doesn't have those one of the 3 categories, zav, zava, yoledet, that but if a pure person, meaning ritual pure person, carried on his shoulder zav, for example, even he is not touching their flesh, such as if the zav was wrapped with a heavy blanket and he carried him like they carry in the army, so you don't touch his body, you touch the blanket, okay? That's called tum'at masa. It's still level of ritual impurity that transmit the ritual impurity to a person who is pure and carried it. And the third one, which relevant to us, it's called heset. Hey samech yud tet. Heset, if one of them touch something that is pure, for example, one of the 3, if impure person indirect touch another person that is pure, or indirectly touch utensil or food, even the pure person did not touch them, did not carry them, he is impure. And I would like to share with you the word by word from the Rambam. Rambam said in Ilchot Mishkav u'Moshav, because it's relevant to us, chapter 8, number 2, Seif Bet, אין בכל אבות הטומאות כולן טומאה שאם תסית את האדם הטהור או את הכלי הטהור תטמא אותם, אלא הזב או חבריו בלבד, which means it's only applied to these three situations, זב, נידה, יולדת, וזוהי הטומאה היתרה בזב שלא מצינו כמותה בכל התורה, שהיא מסית הטהורים טמאים. Only in a person of discharge, and he basically indirectly touch another person or utensil or food, that's the only rare situation that makes that other entity impure. Now, back to our subject. הקיש על גבי שידה תיבה ומגדל. If the zav knocked on a carriage or in crate or cupboard, so we said even if he did not actually come into direct contact with them, tmeim, they are ritually impure. ורבי נחמיה ורבי שמעון מתארים. So Rabbi Shem and Rabbi Shimon render them pure. Even he made this hesed. Okay? My love behaka mifligei. Now we explain what exactly the disputation. Mar Savar, the first one hold that this cupboard, even he hold 40 se'ah, klihu. It's considering a utensil, and since utensil, remember, is one of the three, so is recipient of ritual impurity. Umar Savar, and Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Shimon hold that this cupboard that holds 40 se'ah, ohelu. So it's basically a building, it's not a utensil. And Rashi explained to us that therefore it's not a recipient of ritual impurity. So, meaning that this building that holds 40 se'ah, the big question is if it's considering as a building or is a utensil. So, therefore, the first Tanakama hold that a cupboard that have 40 se'ah, it's considered utensil. And if it's utensil, you can go ahead and demolish it and pull out the Eiruv, and therefore the Eiruv is considering valid. Rabbi Eliezer disagree, and he holds that this building, this cupboard is considering a building, and if it's building, you're not allowed to demolish it, and therefore it's not that he and the Eiruv are in one location, and consequently his Eiruv is not considering an Eiruv. Now Abaye come in, and he rejected that, saying, V'tisbera, do you really hold the disputation in the tractate Zavim, it's if this cupboard or the other two, it's hold as utensil or a real building, vehatanya, I can bring you another proof that shows something else. Ohel, imagine a person who have a discharge, who just somehow touched a tent, but that tent was not fully attached to the ground. Venisat, because he touched it, he hit it, what happened? The tent moved. Do you know, in nowadays you have those portable sukkah? Mm-hmm. So you touch, boom, it moves, right? So what's the din? We said that the tent, tameh, it's impure. Kli ve'enonisat. But if we touch a heavy tool, or if it's attached to the ground, and by doing that nothing happened, tahor, the utensil is pure, which means the tum'at hesed, it's not depend upon if the recipient is a utensil or building, it's only if it's portable or not. Something that is not portable, that is permanent, attached, it's not considering something that potentially become impure for a zav to touch that. So therefore, ktane seifa, in the second clause, what we said that Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Shimon, they purified because they hold that this cupboard that holds 40 se'ah, it has the same halachic category as a tent. So if you have a tent that move because the zav touch it, so he said ve'im ayu nisotin, if this cupboard move because the zav touch it, tme'im. Even the second clause tells us, according to Rabbi Nehemiah and Rabbi Shimon, the minutes as a result of the zav touching it, it's already recipient of impurity. Ze haklal. That's the principle. And you see, I'm going slow because I want to make sure that all of our viewers will clearly understand. It's something that we have to zoom in. Ze haklal. That's the halacha with hesed of zav. Nisat mechamat kocho tameh. If the utensil or the tent move even a little bit from his permanent location, therefore it becomes impure. Mechamat ra'ada. Ra'ada meaning the zav went and he did something far away, but because of that it's affected that building. An example is a very famous story about Rebbe, great Talmudic sage, that his students were praying and praying and praying for him to live long, and he was ill, and he had a non-Jewish servant, and she was upset because in one hand she believed in the power of the prayer, on the other hand she saw that it's just praying to prolong his suffering. So what did she do? She went to the second floor in that building, and she took a very heavy vessel and she put it on the ground, and the entire building was shaking for like 10 seconds. And as a result, he passed. They stopped praying and he passed. Okay? So we're not talking here about passive euthanasia, but what we're talking about situation that you can do something without attaching to the foundation and create something. By her, she touched something related to the foundation, but the point is, if the zav is, he made something that create indirect moving, and as a result, that entity, that, for example, tent, moved, tahor. Why? Because the whole idea of hesed, it's only if the hazav physically move it. But if it's called important, because we're going to study Mitzvah Shem Bavakama Elat, which called koach kocho, the power, the strength that come from the power of the strength, which means it's not direct contact. You are touching a stone, you moving the stone touch another place, and from another place is like a springboard, it hits someone. So it's not that you hit directly, it comes from koach kocho, second degree of your strength. So that's in the law of zav, it's not considering one of the category of tum'at hesed. So now we said, therefore we need to explain this disputation. Ela amar Abaye explained to us the kulei alma hesed mechamat kocho tameh. Everyone agree that this that if the movement is due to direct force of the zav, causes the object to become ritually impure. Mechamat re'ada tahor. However, if the movement is to a vibration, to the floor or base, so it's ritually pure. Vehacha, and the Mishnah in the Tractate Zavim, bir'ada mechamat kocho askinan. They're dealing with a vibrated because of what? That come from the direct force of the Zav, which means when he bang upon the object itself, so that's caused to vibrate but not to move. And here we enter to this disputation. Ubehaka mifligate, the Mar Savar Have said that the Tana Kama hold, the first sage hold, that these two considering a movement. Umar Savar and Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Shimon Lo Have said, which means since it's not considering it's a vibrant movement, and therefore all these cupboard etc., they are all pure. So, meaning, according to this Abaye interpretation of this Tanaic disputation, so it's not even a question if that cupboard holds 40 seah, if it's considering a utensil or considering a building. So, it's not a good source. So, therefore, if you have a large cupboard that holds 40 seah, remember we show example of large cupboard. If you hold 40 seah, it's considering a building, and you cannot demolish it on Shabbat. So the Gemara asks, "Umatnitan b'may mukim nalach." You remember you told me that what the whole subject is about what? About cupboard that made out of wood. So if it's the Mishnah that holding that this is something that have 40 seah, so everyone agree that it's considering a building, and you cannot demolish it and pull out an Eruv. So how come the Tana Kama hold that it is an Eruv? So they respond, Abaye veRava, the Amrei Travayu, that both of them said, Beman'ul uktir bemitna askinan. We're dealing with a lock that is tied with a leather strap. Uva'ina sakina lemifsekei, and you need a knife in order to cut it because there is no key. Tana kama savar lak Rabbi Yossi דאמר כל הכלים ניתנים בשבת חוץ ממסר הגדול והיתד של מחרשה. He hold Tana kama the same as Rabbi Yossi that he said all utensils may move on Shabbat except the large saw and blend of plow. ורבי אליעזר סבר לה כרבי נחמיה דאמר אפילו טלית, אפילו תרווד, even a clock or even a spoon that for sure we can use for regular activity, and nitalin, you cannot take them on Shabbat, אלא לצורך תשמישם, only for their own use, such as, why do you need use for a knife for? You need a knife to cut food, but not a knife to open the screws. The same here. You cannot take the knife to cut this hevel, this rope. You remember that example? If you have it tied with the rope. So you cannot take a knife because the knife you hold, the purpose of the knife is to hold food, but not to cut this rope. Yeah. So therefore he said, you cannot open the cupboard to pull out the Eruv on Shabbat, and consequently the Eruv is not considering a proper Eruv. So because we lack of time, we're not going here to Rashi and Tosfot, etc. But if you want to delve with that more than just Rashi and Tosfot, I recommend it to see the Tur. The Tur is a beautiful explanation on the Orach Chaim Shin Tzadik Dalet 394, that he explained the broader understanding of this machlokot. Mishnah Nidgalgel Chutz Latchum. If one's put the Eruv at the end of the dimension, at the end of the domain of the Tchum, and then the Eruv rolled behind the Shabbat limit. Can be many situations. Nafal alav gal, for example, it's a pile of stone fell on it. So remember, you cannot pull it under that pile. Or nisraf, all of a sudden it burns fire. Truma venitmet, it was for the purpose of truma, and all of a sudden what happened to the truma? Become ritually impure. He said, Mi be'od yom eno eruv. If that happened before Shabbat, so we said that the time of the twilight, he cannot eat the eruv at that time because he is not intent to dwell there, liknot shvita there. But mishechashecha, if it's already happened after he put it, in other words, he put it before the twilight or during the twilight, but the event occurred, for example, at night, after it's definitely Shabbat, harei ze eruv. Why? Because the eruv was made retroactively at the twilight, and now you cannot change that situation. Im safek, if it's a dilemma, you're not sure when they lost the eruv, if it happens before Shabbat or later, now it's a disputation. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda אומרים, harei ze chamar gamal. This person, the position in that comparison, both a donkey driver who must prod the animal from behind and a camel driver who must lead the animals from the front, which means he is not clear, is not certain concerning the Shabbat border. So you have to act in a stringent way, and it's like they are both in his town and at the location where the place of the Eruv. ורבי יוסף ורבי שמעון אומרים, ספק עירוב כשר. They said an Eruv that we are not sure, it's a doubt and validation, nevertheless it's considering a valid, and later we explain. אמר רבי יוסי, אבטולמוס העיד משום 5 זקנים על ספק עירוב שכשר. It's like one of the old sage of Talmud that he testified the name of 5 elders, again going back in a generation, that say that if it's doubt, it's valid. Now the Gemara elaborate. נתגלגל חוץ לתחום. If it happens before Shabbat, we said it's not considering an Eruv. If it's run out. אמר רבא לא שנו להתגלגל חוץ ל-400. That apply only if it's out of 4 cubit. אבל לתוך 400 נותר עירוב או יש לו עירוב. But if it's inside the 4 cubit, it is an Eruv, and therefore it's fine. But again, we don't have time. I wish to, in Biur Halacha Taftet, he explained it at length. Nafal alav gal, but if a pile of stone fell on the Eruv, so we said that it's not an Eruv. Kasal gradachdi ba matzei shakile, if he wants to pull out of the pile, he can do it. Lema batiti lo kirabi amar, kol davar shu ben shum shvut, lo gazru alav ben hashmashod. That Rabbi said that anything that is rabbinic decree did not issue decree that applied during the twilight. So therefore you can go ahead and pull out the twilight and pick out your Eruv, because the prohibition of muktzeh, of set aside, it's not applied to the twilight time. So they have to say that the Mishnah go by sages that disagree with Rabbi, and they hold that something that is prohibited by a rabbinic decree, even the time of twilight is forbidden, and therefore, because you cannot pull out the pile of the stones in the twilight time, therefore the Eruv is not considering an Eruv. Afilu teimar kerebi lo tzricha debai mara v'chatzina. You can't say that Rebbe because you need a hoe or spade in order to remove the Eruv from under the stones, because you have to dig, and it's a labor that prohibited on Shabbat. Utzriche. We need to bring the two circumstances. Itana nitkalgel mishum delei tagabei, because the Eruv is not with him at that place. Aval nafal alav gal tagabei. That the Eruv, if it's the follow the stones, the Eruv is there. Eim alev Eruv is still in that domain. V'itana nafal alav agav. If you go the other way around, you said that the Mishnah had only taught in a case where the pile of rock fell on the Eruv. But the itagabei eim alev Eruv mishum de mechase, because it's covered. אבל נתגלגל זמנינת הזיקה ומייטלי, but if it's a roll, sometimes the wind come and bring it back. Eima le'eve Eiruv, so you may say that it's think that it should be a valid Eiruv. Tzricha, so the Mishnah need to tell us in both cases that it's not Eiruv. And Tosfot said, אפילו תחומים דרבנן, אפילו לרבי, דאמרי כל דבר שהוא משום שבות, לא גזרו עליו בין השבות, מכל מקום לא אוהב עירוב, אבל גם למשל למשקלה והטוי, כיוון אם קנה שביתה במקום שנגלה עירוב, היה עומד מעתה חוץ לתחום, ואין לו אלא 400, because it basically is in a distance from that location. Please read the Tosfot later, I wish to have more time. Or Nisraf, the Mishnah said, or the Eruv was burned, or Truma when it met, it was a Truma and now become ritual impure, which again, all of that, he doesn't have a shimush, he doesn't have, because he doesn't have mekom shvita, he's not dwelling there. So Lamali, why need to bring the two example? Tana Nisraf, we learn in the Eruv that was burned, the Achakoch or the Rabbi Yossi. The Tana Truma v'nitmel odcha Rabbi Meir. So each one is one to convey the far-reaching nature of Rabbi Yossi and the far-reaching nature of Meir, which means that if it's a doubt when it exactly lost, so according to Rabbi Yossi, the Eruv is valid. So as long as he's in the world, I just know where is it. And then the other one, if it's a Truma and become impure, so that's a dilemma if the Safek Eruv, if it's a Eruv or not, so therefore it's not valid. Ve'savar Meir Sfeika lechumra, you're going to tell me that Meir hold that if you are not sure, you go on a stringency. We learn, again, we juxtapose to something else. But now we learn in the Mishnah Instructed Mikvaot, chapter 2, Tamesh Yarad Lidbol, if a person who ritually impure went to the mikveh and dark, so said, Safek Taval, Safek Lo Taval. So the first dilemma is, you're not sure if it's a proper dark or not. ואפילו טבל, but even if for sure he dug in that mikveh, ספק טבל ב-40 שעה, ספק לא טבל ב-40 שעה. Because now it's below than 40 שעה, so the question is that valid or not? וכן, שני מקוות, also if you have two ritual baths, ואחד יש ב-40 שעה ואחד אין ב-40 שעה, I want to have the 40 שעה or not, וטבל באחד מהם ואני הרבה זמן, טבל, if he dug in one of them, and now all of a sudden he doesn't remember which one he did. So they say, Sefekot Tameh. If that Sefek, it's ritually impure. So I'm reading now to the end and then I go to a little explanation. במה דברים אומרים בטומאה חמורה? בטומאה קלה, it's a different story. If it's a טומאה, it's a ritual impurity that's prohibited by the Torah law. So therefore, if it's a Torah law, then we have here an issue. But if it's a light ritual impurity, like rabbinic, that not כגון שאכל אוכלים טמאים ושתה משקים טמאים, if he ate something that it's impure or drink, והבא ראשו ורובה במים שאובים, if he put most of the body in the water שאובים, which means that you take it, how do you translate שאובים by you? Drowned water, right?
In drawn water.
Drawn water,
yeah.
Thank you. So they said, וירד לדבו, או שנפלו על ראשו ורובו שלושה גלוגים מים שאובים, like רב עבדיה יוסף hold that if it's on the top of a person, so it's considering b'diavad level of tvila. So he said, each one of them it's a rabbinic ritual impurity, וירד לטבול, now we go to a regular mikveh to dug, ספק טבל, ספק לא טבל. So the question is that if he dug or not dug? ואפילו טבל, ספק טבל ב-40 שעה, ספק לא טבל ב-40 שעה. The question is, even he did it, it's that in a 40 שעה or not in 40 שעה. וכן שני מקוואות, באחד יש 40 שעה, באחד אין ב-40 שעה, וטבל באחד מהם יודע באיזמן טבל, ספקות טהור, ורבי יוסי מטמא. So the same story, ורבי יוסי make it ritual impure. So you see here that Rabbi Yossi is contradicted himself, because in one place in mikveot he hold that stringency, that if it's even the rabbinic, it's a safek tuah, it's not, and here is, when it's come to Eruv, you see that he is lenient. So now we explain a second, סבר המאיר תחומים דאורייתא הוא. סבר המאיר תחומים דאורייתא הוא, which means we understand that Rabbi Meir hold that the prohibition relating to Shabbat are limited to prohibition by the Torah law. So if it's a safek Eruv, he is more stringent. So they ask, וסבר רבי מאיר, You're going to tell me that all the Tchumim D'Oraita, that it's biblical? But now we're going to study Mitzvah Shem in the Mishnah 57b and 58. Im ein yachol leavli'o, if it's in the valley, and he cannot put it as a part of the 50 amah, cannot swallow by 50 cubit measuring of rope. בזו אמר רבי דוסטאי בר ינאי משום רב מאיר שמעתי שמקדרין בערים. I learned that we pierce in mountain, which means to measure distance as there were a hole from one side of the hill to another. So mekadrin, it's like nokvim. It's like, imagine that the mountain have a hole, and he hold it and he pull it that way. That's what the Rashi said. All these lineages, because we said that the Tchumin is rabbinic, and but we don't do this type of leniency when it's come to biblical, to the Torah. If you tell me that the whole idea of Tchumin is Shabbat limited, is prohibited by Torah law, mi mekadrin, so how come are you allowed to pierce the mountain? אמר רב נחמן אמר רב בר אבוה, אין מקדרין לא ברי מקלט ולא ברי לערופם מפני שאין של תורה. You cannot do this type of piercing in biblical categories such as refuge cities, or the story of the heifer whose neck is broken, because those laws are biblical, are Torah law. But and therefore you are more stringent in regard to making a hole. So now you see a disputation in Eruv that Yosef, you go the rabbinic, and now the opposite, you say Lokasha Alidea de Rabbi, which means one is the Rav Meir himself, the other one is what he heard it, and his Rabbi hold that the limits Eruv is rabbinic. So he said on behalf of Rabbi Yanai that I heard that the pierce in mountain it's considering something, and they concluded this is a resolution and it's correct. So I want to add to that a very important point. Here is the Tosfot, that's 35b at the top of the page. The Tosfot bring a 2 point. One point is called Sfek Sfeika, and another point is a Ritzvah, which means the Chazon Ish, I'll just give you some sources, you can read it later. The Chazon Ish Even HaEzer in 80 explained this Tosfot. There is an issue, you see it many times in a Talmud, that's called Sfek Sfeika. Sfek Sfeika meaning you have a debate in one subject, within the debate you have another debate. So it's debate within the debate. For example, we talk about ritual impurity, so it's the debate within the debate. But that's one school of thought. The Tosfot here in conclusion bring the Ritzvah, and the Ritzvah hold that it's not two different circumstances but only one. So therefore, in that sense, we are more lenient. Let's go to a practical halachot. First subject, what happened if a person put the Eruv in the cupboard and all of a sudden he lost the key? It happens, that's nature. So the two Orachaim in 1495, it says if one places Eruv in the cupboard or in a house and a locket, and then lost the key before Shabbat began, and it's impossible to remove the Eruv without performing a labor prohibited by Torah law, the Eruv is not valid Eruv. But he said it's important to know what the Tur said. Magen Avraham said that if one needs to perform only labor prohibited by a rabbinic decree to remove the Eruv, so the Eruv is valid. So you have to know that there is a lot of disputation here what exactly happened. But if later the key was found, so the cupboard where the Eruv is located was misplaced, and was then found in a place where one can carry it without transgressing a Torah law, the Eruv is valid. So that's Shulchan Aruch Orachaim 394. We talk about Hesed, we talk about ritual impurity. So if when you touch a utensil and the utensil is attached to the ground and other utensil is stuck on the top of it, if the bottom utensil was moved by a zav and the stack of the utensils off, it's considering a ritual impure because they were moved by a zav. However, if the upper utensils only fell because of the bottom, so they said it's not an issue. Remember, we talk about tumot zav that come indirectly. We said that kol ha'ikelim nitalim b'Shabbat, Shulchan Aruch 308. All utensils, even one generally used for purpose prohibited on Shabbat, may be carried on Shabbat if one needs them in order to perform a permitted act if one needs to use the place in which they are located. However, if one is generally careful not to handle the utensils for everything other than its primary purpose, due to its importance and its concern of possible monetary loss, one may not move it on Shabbat. That's the according of the Rabbi Yossi. We discuss also in a situation that the Eruv was lost or burned. If the Eruv was lost and burned prior to honest of Shabbat, it's not a valid. But if it's happened after the nightfall, it is valid. And we learn also if it's the pile of stones fell on the Eruv. So, but one can still access it by moving the stones. It's a valid Eruv. However, if one must perform a labor prohibited by Torah law, so the Eruv is not valid. The last halacha of today is if Tameh sheyarad litbol. Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 201 said that if a ritually impure person descended to immerse himself and a doubt arose with regard to his immersion, he is impure since he retains his previous status for impurity until his status of purity has been clearly established. This ruling is the Be'er HaGolah, it's according to Rabbi Yossi, and some authority maintain that this is only applied to someone who is ritually impure by Torah law. But one who is ritually impure only by rabbinic decree is presumed to have become pure, and according to an attribute Mishnah, and there's the Rambam ruling, and basically with Vilna Gaon, who comment on Shulchan Aruch Yoredea 201.
Shula